Al Capone, 1899 to 1947, was an American gangster and notorious crime boss who rose to power during the Prohibition era in the 1920s and 1930s. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Capone moved to Chicago as a young man and began his criminal career as a member of the 5 Points Gang. He quickly established himself as a ruthless enforcer and became a key figure in the city's organized crime underworld. Capone's criminal activities included bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, and extortion, and he controlled a vast empire of illegal businesses across Chicago and beyond. He was known for his flamboyant personality and love of publicity, often posing for photographs and giving interviews to the press. Despite his wealth and power, Capone was a controversial figure, and he was responsible for a number of violent crimes, including murder. He was also the subject of intense scrutiny from law enforcement, who were determined to bring him to justice. Al Capone's tax evasion conviction is one of the most notorious criminal cases in American history. In the 1920s and 1930s, Capone was the head of a powerful organized crime syndicate in Chicago, which made him incredibly wealthy and influential. Despite his numerous criminal activities, including bootlegging, extortion, and murder, Capone was able to avoid prosecution for many years. However, the government eventually turned its attention to Capone's finances and began investigating him for tax evasion in 1927. The case against Capone was built on the theory that he had failed to report and pay taxes on his illegal income. Although Capone claimed to be a legitimate businessman, the government was able to gather evidence to the contrary, including witness testimony and bank records. In 1931, Capone was indicted on 22 counts of tax evasion and related charges. The trial was held in Chicago and was closely watched by the public and the media. Capone's defense team argued that he was being unfairly targeted by the government and that his wealth was the result of legitimate business activities. Despite these arguments, Capone was found guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion and was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, as well as hefty fines and back taxes. Capone's tax evasion conviction was significant for a number of reasons. It was one of the first times that a major organized crime figure had been successfully prosecuted for financial crimes. It also demonstrated the power of the federal government to take down even the most powerful and influential criminals. Finally, it cemented Capone's place in American history as one of the most notorious and colorful figures of the early 20th century. Al Capone was one of the most famous and feared gangsters in American history, and his criminal exploits have become the stuff of legend. And of course he was sent to the most famous prison in the world, Alcatraz. Al Capone's time at Alcatraz, also known as The Rock, is one of the most famous stories of his life. After being convicted of tax evasion in 1931, Capone was sent to Alcatraz, a maximum security prison located on an island in San Francisco Bay. At Alcatraz, Capone was initially placed in a cell on D Block, which was reserved for the prison's most dangerous and troublesome inmates. Despite his reputation as a ruthless gangster, Capone was initially treated with some degree of respect by the other prisoners and guards, who were in awe of his wealth and power. However, Capone's time at Alcatraz was far from easy. He was subjected to a strict daily routine, which included work assignments and meals served in a communal dining hall. He was also frequently searched for contraband and subjected to solitary confinement for disciplinary infractions. Despite these challenges, Capone managed to maintain a degree of control over his life at Alcatraz. He was allowed to have special privileges, such as access to a radio and newspapers, and he was able to use his wealth to bribe guards and other inmates. Al Capone's time at Alcatraz was filled with a number of interesting stories and anecdotes, many of which have become part of popular culture. Capone was known to be an enthusiastic musician and was often seen playing the banjo while in prison. He was allowed to keep a banjo in his cell and was said to have used his musical skills to entertain the other inmates and boost morale on the cell block. Although Capone was never officially referred to as the Birdman of Alcatraz, he did keep a small canary in his cell during his time at the prison. The bird was said to have been a gift from a fellow inmate and was a source of comfort to Capone during his confinement. Despite being locked up on a remote island, Capone was still able to exert a degree of influence over the outside world. He continued to run his criminal empire from behind bars, using smuggled messages and bribes to maintain control over his associates. Capone's cell on D Block has become one of the most famous attractions on Alcatraz. Visitors to the island can see the small, sparsely furnished cell where Capone spent much of his time and imagine what life must have been like for one of America's most notorious gangsters.